How we doing? So, this isn't my art today. This is something from a buddy of mine who wanted some critique. So, we're gonna do a little bit of investigation, a little bit of education. That's lovely. Now, if you're interested in this guy's art, there's his name. We're not stealing anything. Just doing a little study and critique today. Oy. The thing that Hollow Point specializes in, that's gonna be anime girls with guns, because that's the thing that's got a lot of cool factor that people really like. And that's 100% A-okay. But there's a couple things to keep in mind when you're doing the kinds of illustrations that, well, artists from the other side of the ocean got really slick style. They render things really well. And there's some entrapments that we can get caught in when we're trying to study that level of execution in the art. There's nothing wrong with visible brushstrokes, but we can get a little bit lost in in trying to build out these shapes, and the brushstrokes kind of building out on us funny. Now, what Hollow has going on here is pretty solid, because you're able to tell these are khaki pants. You can feel the texture of that in the illustration. But you'll notice, because of the shading construction, the some of the folds are a little bit out of spec. For example, on this. Sup, Holly? So we're just gonna start by sculpting some of that back out. it helps to remember that when you do a fold, that's something that's got really tight geometry, your clothing folds. Like if you were to slice a fold in half, not in half, but like if you were to slice a fold so you could only see it from the perspective of the fabric itself, folds and wrinkles are pretty fine. You're gonna have your highlights on this side and your shadows on this side. And depending on the fabric, it can get even more nuts if you've got like subfolds adjacent to your main fold. So we're talking like it going back in on you. And your rendering gets even more bananas, because you got this corner in here where the light's hard to get into, and this corner in here where the light's hard to get into. Let's see. You also got to be careful to make sure your light is consistent on your figure. Like this highlight right here is a little bit confusing. And you can have hot highlights on the folds. There's nothing wrong with that. But you got to be mindful of where it makes the most sense. Girls' work pants can be kind of tricky because they've got the manufacturers, they want it to fit nice, but it's still going to have some of those characteristics that only work fabric is going to have. All right. Bah. Also, when you're working, don't be afraid to use the lasso selection to limit what your limit the area of effect your brush is going to have. Because sometimes you just need to make sure that it's not gonna make sure that your paint's not gonna spill out where it doesn't need to spill out. Now, one thing to keep in mind also, as long as when you're doing your painting, if you want to have your strokes visible, there's nothing wrong with that. But you want to be real intentional about what your strokes are doing when it comes to visibility. If you've ever seen a J.C. Leyendecker painting, in fact, let's see here. Let's see if I can bring one into view. All right, so this is one of the paintings of J.C. Leyendecker, one of the greatest illustrators of the last century. I freaking love his work. Now, you'll notice, like, strokes are visible all over his artwork. And we don't give that a second thought. But his forms are also still incredibly convincing. Like, you can see... Oh, behave. Like, you can see where the strokes are visible in his work here, where they're visible here. The 3 dots of paint right there, the way he does his highlights. You can see where he just put a fat dab of paint right here. And how he does that for his white highlights in general. And how he renders the folding in the clothes. Now, being able to see the strokes, that's, again, nothing wrong with that. But you got to make sure that you know exactly what you're doing when you're making those strokes visible. Because you can see there's careful measurement in terms of the colors he uses to bring those out. And a lot of subtlety in the use of those visible strokes on the skin. And in any places where a fold is not immediately evident. You can also see how the direction and visibility of the strokes lends itself to making the hair more convincing. It follows the strands of hair. Incredible stuff, truthfully. Now, with dress shirts kind of like this one, like office people are known to wear, creases and folds are going to be a whole heck of a lot sharper. The planes of volume on one of these break apart super, super crisp. If you've ever seen like any police shows or any office dramas or office comedies, it's incredibly clear where the planes are intended to be on these. Unless you've got a thicker cotton shirt, but you're not going to see as much thicker cotton. It's going to be a really thin, really crisp blend of some kind with dress shirts. You have to notice these things. And you have to make sure any form lines for your garments reflect the understanding of that really sharp texture. Hollow isn't here this morning. I'm basically talking behind his back. I'm really sorry about that, bud. But when you see this, I promise, it's just because I want you to do better and learn better. when you're doing super professional looking workwear like this, unless you have a specific vibe in mind, you want to make sure that you want to make sure that any ridges from the seams, like any changes in the surface of your fabric, are really tight and flat. A lot of professional workwear is all about having a really slim profile. Whoopsie. About having a lot of subtlety in the appearance of the stitching and the appearance of where the fabric is joined together. So you want to make sure you capture that. Also, make sure when you do pants, the longer end of the fly is where the opening usually is, so the button needs to match that. A lot of getting anything right in art is just paying attention to the way things are, and having a fusion of both, having a fusion of accurate representation of the details that matter with that mix of your own creativity and uniqueness. It's the best way I can put it. That mix of your own creativity in how the world appears, as well as that fidelity to detail. Also buttons. When you put buttons on your shirt, be mindful of how that's going to affect the way the fabric hangs. Because buttons create points of tension on a garment. So that's going to give you spots where you'll pull a little bit along. The shirt will get pulled at spots where a button is present, if there's tension. And again, make sure these creases and folds look super crisp. This right here, this is a Fed. Feds have dry cleaners on call 24/7. Everybody knows this. Now with kind of a more slick style, like I know my buddy Hall is trying to do, it can be helpful. It can be helpful in your illustrations to have fingernails on your anime girls. That just adds a little touch of just a little touch of dimensionality. And a little bit of personality. Now, on the server where this came from, there was a little bit of discussion about gold parts on this gun right here. About it being a little bit too gaudy. But Hollow, the artist behind this, thought, like, no, we have to have this. It makes sense for this kind of character. It makes sense for the kind of story he's trying to tell with the image. So if she's got a gaudy gold gun, well, of course, she's gonna have gaudy gold fingernails too. That just makes sense. To me, it does anyway. Now, when you have objects on your character, you also want to be mindful, incredibly mindful, of the shadows that that's going to cast on the character. Do we know, for example, we have to make sure we know what direction the shadows and what direction the light's coming from, because that's going to tell us what direction we need to be pointing our shadows and keep everything clear. Make sure we're describing our forms correctly. So, for example, for a general rule, this thing that I'm outlining in white here is going to be the shadow casting surface for this kind of light source. The general light source as I understand it in the image. Coming down from kind of this direction. Based on what I've seen in other parts of the image. So, the form of the arm right here, if I'm understanding this correctly, is all, it's going to be, a lot of this is going to be hiding behind the gun. So if I've got the gun casting a shadow like this, and I'm just trying to stay consistent within the light source, everything in this area shouldn't have a whole heck of a lot of light on it. If I'm reading this correctly. I hope I am. So, we're going to want to take all of this. Oh, not like that. So it took more struggle than I'm used to under there, but you'll see on the corner of the screen that I introduced a shading layer. And we're just going to use that to alter the lighting of that arm a little bit. You'll see I'm fiddling around with the color just a touch, but the point here being we're having to make a kind of dramatic alteration to the lighting, so I'm trying to make that a little bit easier on myself. Are you in there, Hollow? Did you sneak in while I wasn't looking? Or were you awakened by a no-knock raid by the FBI? Get out of my walls, Hollow. Take a seat like a normal human being. You're not going to see him in the YouTube chat because he's invisible to the naked eye. Oh, Hollow, you missed it earlier, but we talked a little bit about some ways you might be able to study how to get the folds in your clothes. One approach to help you learn how to get folds in your clothes looking more convincing and crisp. We looked at some illustration by J.C. Leindecker, which might be a little off from the kind of art direction you want to have in your work, but I feel like seeing the way it's in action on this would be a useful instruction for the way you want to approach it in your own work. Now, granted, some of the fabrics we have now are a little bit beyond the time of the kind of fabrics he had to describe when he was around doing illustration in the last century. But I still feel like it would be educational, very educational, very useful to see the way he approaches describing folds in garments. There we go. You'll see we put some gold fingernails on her to match her gold-trimmed gun. Always be mindful when you're trying to do more, when you're trying to do more advanced rendering. Be careful that the results of your work, be careful not to make your image too soft, which is kind of a nebulous way to describe what we're trying to make happen with this picture. But you'll see in here where it's kind of like, where the apparent effect is kind of like squished rubber. That's the best way I can think to describe this. You've got it a little bit better here where you're building the scarf out and you've got more evident folds that way. But unless you're dealing with some kind of shiny polyester, you're not usually going to have this kind of rounded, squishing surface like I'm trying to describe here. The kind of jackets that you see law enforcement and military people wear is more like a canvas. And that kind of fabric has a more, I think we can say, rocky texture to the way it folds. Does that make sense? Because that's what we wanted to try to describe more when we have a mountain style jacket, like what law enforcement and military types wear for work. one good detail to think of also is, like, you got a little bit of it down here, but make sure you're thinking about what kind of cuffs you're putting on the jacket on the arms. Because this is an occasion where that's a feature that helps sell the believability and the dimensionality of your illustration. And of course, when you do that, you also have to consider how that's going to change the fit of the garment. Like, for example, is this a garment that has a loose fitting cuff with kind of a strap cuff? Like that? Or is it one that has a stretchy cuff, kind of like a fitted sweater? And I'm adding this detail kind of prematurely, but it's still something you want to think about, because number one, it's an important detail to think about, but number two, that's also going to change the way that the garment ends up fitting. Because if you have one of these ribbed fitted type cuffs on your garment, that's going to change the way that the fabric bunches when it comes down to terminate on that cuff. Remember to think more in terms of shapes than strokes. Strokes are important. Strokes are important because that still helps you make good, detailed descriptions of your form. It's also going to be very useful to have in mind if you want to make line art a part of your equation. But shapes are going to be what communicates your light and communicates your drawing more than lines and forms are. Lines are usually there in the service of forms. sorry for making Descent hollow, I really am. I'm getting a little lost in the sauce here, and I do apologize for that. What we're doing right now is tightening up the way the jacket wraps around the body. Make sure that hem is consistent in length. You want to make sure the way a shape wraps around the body makes sense, that it appears to be the same length all around. So, if we trace pure white, we need pure white. If you trace the bottom of this jacket, where what we see right now, this line right here is not consistent in describing the form in terms of making sure we're staying the same length all around. So, what we want to do is make sure that, for one, the end of this line right here ought to connect with, so we want to change this line to be over here. That way, we get a nice swoop that wraps around the figure consistently, makes it feel like it, like the jacket is actually being worn here. So kind of like that-ish. So we'll come in and clean this form up right here. All right. Oh my goodness, I didn't even notice this. Look at this. Now this is some sauce right here. We got a pattern right here. We got a pattern right here. I love that. I love that so much. Okay. 30 minutes left on stream. Oi. Next we can look at some hair and face details. Golly. see if I can make this behave the way I want to make this. So starting off, we're just adding a little, well, not a little. In this case, we're adding a lot to help make it clear, help clear up the way these, the way the forms of these strands of hair are going. We got good grouping here. The big thing is just making the texture feel more like hair, which is a challenge. It is not an easy thing to pull off. I'm not exactly a master of it myself. I don't know who I think I am trying to play like I know that much about this. Having said that, this is one where it's a really weird balance of form description, but also having an appropriate amount of high detail strokes to produce convincing forms. This is this is one application where Hollow, if you remember our study on how lines describe forms when it comes to in the pencil work, that's something that can really help in doing convincing lighting with your hair. You'll see a lot of scribbling here, and I do apologize for that, but just trying to make sure I don't run out of time on this project, on this segment here. one thing to keep in mind, if you want eye patches on your characters, those are going to be pretty thin straps in many cases, and they got to hug on super tight to make sure they don't fall off the eye. So see where I'm flattening that out and see how that affects the way the hair collects into that. Just make sure you're consistent on that. You did all right there. You did all right there starting off. Just gotta strengthen it a little bit. I guess remember also that with with that super tight eye patch strap, it's not going to cast that much of a shadow unless it's lifting off the skin a little bit, which it might lift off the skin a little bit, like right here as it's trying to cross the eyebrow ridge. Oh shoot, is that a split eyebrow? Based. Sharpen that edge a little bit. Now you'll see here I'm going in and backing some of that off because I might have gone just a little bit overboard with those super bright highlights. But you can see how that helped develop the form just a little bit when it comes to describing the hair nicely. Hair is one of those things that's going to be super I think super reactive to light. Not quite. I am going to cop to the fact that I'm working a little more with just making this kind of look pretty over against any kind of super established science. I'm trying to stay somewhat consistent with the lighting that you got established here, but I'm just trying to make pretty hair. Now, I'll say not to get super distracted with doing strands when you're first building the hair out, and you don't want to get super distracted with strands even when you get down to the part where you can be detailed, but getting a dark color and just cutting some strands in either with a dark color or a light color, it's still going to add just a little bit extra that you'll pat yourself on the back for, that you'll feel good about doing. But you'll notice that there's some distance between me and the table here. I'm not coming in and scribbling in every single hair, or trying to get every single the strand detail of every single hair right. We're just breaking that form apart a little bit. And then just for funsies, we're going to throw a handful of really hot highlights into that hair. Ah! Let's see, we got 17 minutes left. Okay. I'm gonna do a little bit here. It's okay to have lighter eyelashes in the work, 100% pro that. One thing we do want to be careful of is making sure that they've got good contrast with the rest of your image. Because those eyelashes are going to be part of what helps, that's going to be part of what helps draw the viewer in. and put a little bit more focus on the eye. I'm going to try to keep that color pretty rich, but then let's see. Wait, what am I doing? I can just this. Okay. So I've got a mask established, so we won't leave the area of the face with anything we do, even if we do kind of a funny lasso. Whoops. That's not helping me at all. That's why I have this soft pen tool, which does basically the same thing as a round tip brush in Photoshop used to do. I can't wrap my head around the paintbrushes in Clip Studio Paint. I simply can't. this has the desired effect. Kind of. Ah, yes, of course. Exactly what we're looking for. We're going to increase the contrast on these eyebrows just a little bit. And there's not really any reason to do any kind of advanced rendering on eyebrows, but in this moment I'm doing it just because I can. And then... Whoops. We need the picture credits. This is Hollow Point. This is not mine. We need to be very clear about that. This is not my work. I'm just painting over. I'm just painting over it because I want my friend to do well. And let's see if this does anything for it. Could have done more on the pants. Oh, I could have done some on the fur on the collar too. make sure the lighting of your piece puts appropriate focus on what you actually want to look at. You obviously making sure your lighting is correct in terms of, is it daytime or nighttime? Making sure that's on point is a big help. But it's important to make sure that anything that's not your subject isn't at a light level that makes it difficult to see your subject. And then inside the actual thing you want visible, whoops, make sure the level of contrast is appropriate to keep it interesting, and make sure all the elements you want visible and in focus are visible and in focus. Is it actually better than the original? I'm not going to say one way or another, but hopefully we learned something today about the way you want to make your garments look, the way you want your lighting to look, the things that you need to notice when you're going to put a costume on your character. You got to pay attention to all kinds of little things, but at the same time not get lost in details. It's a weird relationship, and the blessing I had in this case is I already had a finished picture to look at to pick it apart and really point out, hey, this is what you do want to do, this is what you don't want to do. But this isn't me trying to say I'm better than anybody else or better than what's going on here. What this is me saying, don't be afraid to try things. Don't be afraid to keep pushing and learning, and make sure you're always paying attention to the world around you, because it's going to be full of all kinds of little important details as to what your art needs to be filled with to make it accomplish what you want to accomplish. Anyway, that's it from me. Appreciate y'all stopping by. We'll see you on Monday.